This is Politricking
On record, Tshidi.
with Tshidi Madia on EWN.
Hello, welcome to Politricking. It is episode 8 of season 6 of an EWN Politics podcast. I've been saying we're talking obviously to newsmakers, politicians, people in the political landscape. Again, I make the argument, it's fine, it's all good if you're not interested, but it is interested in you. What's happening in our country is interested in you. When you go to the store and buy a loaf of bread, I know some leaders don't know the cost, but when you go to the store and buy a loaf of bread, what informs that costing, what informs a lot of the decisions and the issues around that store has a lot to do with politics. And we've been going on and on and on about the budget. And unfortunately for you and I, we're going to continue because Budget 3.0 is due to be tabled, I think, on the 21st of May. So this conversation is going to stay with us for a while. I imagine even after the fact, I think there are lessons we're supposed to learn as a country about how to manage that process. And there are lessons I promise you, because I know y'all, you will completely disregard. So we'll find ourselves dealing with those issues again in the future. If you've picked up on it, I think people have dubbed Sinawo Tambo from the EFF vet police. I think it's actually Sihle Lonzi, his own colleague in the EFF, made him a vet police. Because what's been quite remarkable is seeing what's been quite remarkable is seeing Sinawo rising to the occasion. A lot of people have spoken about what the EFF looks like following a lot of the happenings in the party last year. And a lot of people have wondered whether or not it'll have leaders that rise to the occasion. So I think to some people it's been quite refreshing. And I think to a lot of journalists, they're intent on literally people are trying to give you your flowers in the moment for stepping up and doing what you ought to be doing. Because that is actually your job, right? As somebody elected to parliament, he joins me on studio. He doesn't look too great, which is bothering me a little bit. But Sinawo, hi, welcome to Politricking.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have a terrible headache, but happy to join you.
That makes me a little bit sad. I'm going to try to be mindful of the headache and I'll try and manage time well. Let's speak about that budget. For me, the important lessons that we should heed as a country over the past few months, but some of those will literally fall through the cracks. Your takeaway from what you've seen with the country, from that initial date in February when it was meant to be tabled, to right now where we sit waiting to see what happens with Budget 3.0.
Look, I think one of the most important things that we should take away from what happened with this budget is that the ruling party has never interacted with the budgets that is presented in Parliament before. So I think the deepest reflection was that on the 19th of February, when the first budget was supposed to be addressed, there were murmurings from the ANC that it was only presented to Cabinet about 5 or 6 hours before it was actually taken to Parliament. So this shows you that fiscal policy and the budgeting process in South Africa has not been operating with political input for the past 31 years. So since 1994, it seems like the ANC was, for the first time, interacting with the budget process. And they were happy to interact with it in a way where Treasury just gives them the budget and they go present it in Parliament. And Enoch Godongwana even says under normal circumstances that would just pass through the ANC's majority vote. So they didn't have any appreciation of the technical process around it. They didn't have any interest in having political input about it. And they had sort of submitted all forms of fiscal planning to National Treasury because of the presumption that there's an inherent expertise that should not be sort of fiddled with. And I think that has been a grave mistake the ANC has made and has been the result of why there's so much unemployment, so much stagnant economic growth in South Africa. So I think that's my biggest takeaway, that it's unfortunate that the ANC did not really interact with the budget process until it came to not having the majority it had to just pass it and tick a box as it had in the past.
Do you think, though, that the lessons, and I go back to that thing about things falling through the cracks, do you think the important lessons that we should heed as a nation, even about our own engagement with what goes into our budget, because that's taxpayers' money and it's programs that must service people. Do you see us actually taking those lessons moving forward?
I think we should. There needs to be a much more broader consultative process in terms of how the budget is drafted, and not only post, because what happens is that the Standing Committee on Finance has these public hearings after the budget is presented on the fiscal framework, and the Appropriations Committee has public hearings on the Division of Revenue Bill and the Appropriations Bill. But I think there should be something that happens before National Treasury even crafts its proposal, which it gives to the Minister of Finance, because they sort of try to ring fence as to what they presume is necessary for South Africa in order for it to grow the economy as well. And I think it's incorrect. And I think the lesson we must learn is that we must participate much more meaningfully in the budgeting process as well, but also acquaint ourselves with the laws that govern it, the legislation that governs it, and break. There's a mirror that National Treasury puts up, and I think the Minister of Finance and the ones of the past as well, of utilizing this dense economic jargon that sort of cuts off ordinary citizens from interacting with the budget process. Terminology like fiscal consolidation, fiscal discipline. So they sort of cover all of this meaningful budget process that affects the ordinary citizen with terminology that sort of cuts you off and makes you disinterested. So we need to engage in active citizenship in terms of understanding the legislative process around the budget, but also challenge Treasury to make it more accessible in terms of language, because it's not necessary to call the cutting of spending for health, education, and social grants fiscal consolidation. It's austerity. Even austerity is another dense word. You can call it spending cuts and explain what they entail. So a lot of accountability falls through the cracks because of the use of this terminology, whereas it's not as difficult to understand if there's active attempt by those who govern to make the ordinary person understand what the budget is and how it affects them on an everyday basis.
I want to come back to the issue of the posture of Treasury. You've touched on it a few times already, so I will come back to it. But before, let's speak about greater participation, even greater parliamentary involvement, which is what the EFF wants to see. What does that look like?
Look, it looks like, for example, we already have the power. So parliamentarians don't seem to understand the powers vested in them by legislation to interact with the budget proposals. And one of the shocking things that sort of threw the Standing Committee on Finance off, including the chairperson of it, is that the EFF treated what the minister presented as a proposal that can be amended using the Money Bills Amendment Procedure Act. So this is what caused the irregularities that happened in the Standing Committee on Finance in the first place, because the members of the ANC who sit in that committee, and the chairperson is a member of the ANC as well, did not have an appreciation that we can amend what was being proposed to us. So we had to go through the painstaking process of explaining that this is a proposal, and even the one that's going to be presented on the 21st of May is a proposal that we can amend. So that is the first sort of thing that we need to ingrain in the psychology of parliamentarians, that the budget is actually your responsibility in terms of how it's allocated to different divisions, different departments, nationally, provincially, and in the local sphere as well. And I've seen the Minister of Finance now say that they won't consider any other increases of tax proposals, and they're speaking particularly to the EFF, which is making those proposals in terms of an increase in the corporate tax, an introduction of a wealth tax, a once-off tax to trusts that have accumulated wealth pre-1994 because they were accumulated that wealth through apartheid segregation and laws. So you can hear that he's already speaking in terms as if he's got the authority to say to us that we're not going to consider any tax proposal. It's not up to him. He brings a proposal to Parliament, and if Parliament can find a consensus around increasing the corporate tax or introducing a wealth tax, he is bound by that. He's got 2 days to consider those proposals. But ultimately, it's in the hands of Parliament whether we support those proposals or amend them or reject them or not. And that's something that we need to ingrain, I think, in parliamentarians more especially, who are representatives of the electorate, who elected them to be there. There's no one who voted for you to cut spending on education, who voted for you to cut spending on health, or to cut social grants. No one voted for you to increase VAT. So we all know that we represent constituencies that are going through tough times economically. So it's our responsibility as parliamentarians to interact with the budget in that sense as well, because Treasury is not the alpha and omega, and shouldn't be, and has been allowed to be for the past 30 years. And the recent elections has shocked them, has shifted power. I mean, the commentary around Treasury recently, someone wrote, and I think it was an editorial in the Business Day, stating that there's an attack on Treasury. You can see that they're not used to interrogation. They're not used to their proposals being amended in any sense or form. So we need to shift that psychology that there's no attack on Treasury. We're exercising what we're empowered to do in terms of legislation.
And I suppose the so-called state capture years didn't help. Now think about it. It was seen as the last bastion, what stood its ground against a pushback. So for me, I've always looked at Treasury as almost sacred to the eyes of many, purely because it was seen as, again, the one that refused to buckle under particular pressure. Let's speak about that a little bit more, because the minister also does display that. When you say that it's not up to him to take certain decisions, to refuse to even entertain certain ideas, that it's not about the individual, but that is what we've been facing. And I think in part that kind of arrogance is one of the reasons why I imagine you calling for the minister to step down. I don't see how that happens, I'll be honest. And part of the reason why I don't see why that happens let me separate the two. Actually, let me focus on the minister for 2 seconds. I don't see how that happens because what the ANC unveiled when they had that weird media briefing with all the small parties, what they were showing was a voting bloc. That's actually what they were showing, that we have the majority. So in trying to protect an Enoch Ondongwana, yes, the MK's got it wrong that you can go after an individual minister as opposed to the cabinet, but the minister as an individual is already receiving a shield. The episode before yours was Mkhuleko Hlengwa of the IFP, and he said to me, the minister's not done anything illegal that should call for his head. That they want to be able to look at what went wrong much later to assess whether the shortcomings were in what happens. But one can also argue, but the minister's plunged the country into a crisis, and that shouldn't necessarily be a question of legality in making a decision about whether or not somebody's fit for purpose.
Yeah, look, it's not a legal question. You're absolutely correct. I agree with you on that. It's a question of competence for the EFF. I mean, it can't be, and under normal circumstances, and we're coming from a central command team meeting this weekend now. So the president of the EFF speaks to this, that under normal circumstances, there would be a volatile market reaction if there was a delay of a presenting of a budget on 2 occasions, and now there's a third attempt to do that, considering the calendar of when you have to have a budget adopted by Parliament in terms of the financial year. The markets would have reacted in a volatile manner. There would be an economic crisis. And I think for businesses, there was that ridiculous proposal by SARS at one point before the court order that said there could be 2 VAT rates operating simultaneously until the 15th of May.
Yes.
That's the type of chaos that puts businesses at risk that have spent money adjusting their VAT rates in anticipation of either a reversal or an increase of VAT hikes. So there's economic turmoil that has occurred due to Enoch Ondongwana's first reluctance to engage with other political parties in terms of proposals that are alternatives to VAT hikes, due to what we called deceptive interactions that he was having up until the court order with political parties, where he gave them an impression that the VAT hike can be reversed by him, whereas he knew full well that he can't do that, and he stated that in his court papers. So he's operated deceptively, he's operated outside of consultation, even with his own political party, because if the ANC claims that they did not support VAT hikes, then when did they emanate from?
Yeah,
so
some do.
There's a lot that needs to be interrogated in terms of Enoch Ondongwana's own competence to continue in that role, and the implications of what he has done over the past 3 months on the economy, on businesses and small businesses in particular. That is the basis for the call for the resignation, to try to make the conversation about law and a learning moment. I've seen the narrative that the ANC is trying to push, that this has been a learning moment for all of us.
We've never been here
We've never
before.
been here before, uncharted waters. It's
It's
real,
phrase,
it's just rhetoric. I saw Musimaimane, Songeze Zibia also falling in line with that we must protect the Minister of Finance. He's engaging, he's listened to political parties. He didn't listen to anyone. No political party's proposal for an alternative revenue generation mechanism has been considered by Enoch Ondongwana. He's telling us we have to make tough financial fiscal decisions, which is cutting of spending on critical frontline services. So this shows you that we don't have a budget in South Africa now, not because of there's been consultation by Enoch Ondongwana, but because it was forced by a court order. So the situation that is created is unprecedented, and it warrants him to resign. And we still believe that he should, because he's thrown us into an abyss. And there's political parties that said that they voted for the fiscal framework because they wanted to avoid South Africa not having a budget. We don't have it now. There was talks of a fiscal shutdown. That won't happen because if you understand legislation, the Public Finance Management
The budget
Act,
will continue for some time.
we can continue.
Then let's speak about Treasury. I think you've made your point quite clear about why the minister needs to resign on your end. I asked about Treasury. I kind of understood, as I said to you, why a particular perspective on Treasury exists, right? But having said that, we all recognize that it's got this unfettered powers that people complain about. It makes considerations that are more economic and not political. Yet it actually, in essence, should be trying, is an instrument to bring something to life that's political. How do you curb Treasury's powers? What needs to be done?
Look, we are thinking that there should be an input on the drafting of the budget that is political, and perhaps from Parliament, because as we said, we engage with the proposals from Treasury after they've been developed, which is after the fact, and then we make amendments or proposals for amendments after the fact. The EFF thinks that there should be key priority areas that should be developed by Parliament that structure the spending proposals and revenue generation proposals by Treasury politically. So Parliament must develop priority areas where we want to do spending, and then advise Treasury that this is what we want to focus on. This is how much we think we need to stimulate the economy. This is how we think we can do it. And this is our political and economic analysis of what the consequences that would be domestically and in terms of international markets. So We can't continue to operate on the presumptions of National Treasury as if they are correct. And there's a precedence for that. We raised in the first meeting with the Minister of Finance in Parliament, as the Standing Committee of Finance, the fact that National Treasury consistently makes wrong projections of economic growth on a year-by-year basis, and no one accounts for them. So their modeling of economic growth projections is consistently incorrect. I mean, they projected this year, before the last budget fell away, that would grow the economy by 1.9%. The International Monetary Fund says 1%. And year after year, they revised down their projections. And that shows you that economic modeling within National Treasury is flawed, but they insist that they've got a proper process on how they do it. And we disagree with them. And we actually think that they over-project economic growth in order to stabilize market sentiments. And then when they fall to a lower growth rate, they'll blame domestic or international conditions or external factors. But their modeling is flawed. The economy has grown just under 1% over the past 10 years and they're at the center of that. So the presumption needs to go away. There's a myth that there's expertise that is inherent there, and that presumption needs to go away. Let's get political involvement. We're not saying we're experts, but we surely have our own internal economic development policy postures and positions that we can propose to Treasury. And we as people who are elected can set the priorities that Treasury can move forward to. So I think there needs to be a process before and not afterwards in order for us to ensure that we get proper budget proposals.
Interestingly enough, I think most parties actually agree on the need for political involvement, some political involvement. That's why I find similarities across the board. I want to look beyond the budget. I want to look back at the EFF. You and I had a conversation when the EFF marked 10 years. So I went back and I listened back to it, and I laughed a little because back then I said to you, SA has never been the same. And that remains very true. But then I also then asked you a question of what happens next. I did not predict half of the things that happened to the EFF in 2024. I think many people didn't predict. The election results themselves. I think there were conversations, there was research suggesting a plateauing of the party, but I didn't see KZN, for instance. What happened with Floyd Shivambu and Dalimpofu, I didn't see those things happening. What happened to Mwiseni Ndlozi, I didn't see happening. Let's speak about an EFF that moves from that massive showing at FNB Stadium. I mean, Vusi Khoza, who was a regional chair in KZN, remains to date aggrieved about being fired from the party on the back of buses during that particular event.
Look, I think the 10th anniversary was a shocking moment, not only for South Africa, but a lot of the enemies of the EFF in terms of capital domestically. And just the white capitalist establishment. I mean, there was not an expectation that it would have that type of resounding success. And a lot of things changed from then. I mean, a lot of political parties were established before the elections. Some of them didn't end up contesting. Your Change Starts Now. There was your Bossas, which was not supposed to be a political party initially. He said it was going to do something independent, wanted to bring something different, ended up forming a political party. And there was a sort of coalescing, and especially by the Democratic Alliance, because before the MK party came in, if you remember, the Ipsos polls placed EFF at about 19% in terms of its projection. So the disruptive factor of MK also played a role, of course, post that 10th anniversary. So we think that the coalescing around the narrative that the EFF being in government represented doomsday, which was pioneered by the Democratic Alliance, it came after that 10th anniversary. There was attempts to shift the narrative around the success of the anniversary and minimize it to the kill the Boer, kill the farmer. And you could see the building up of the EFF is firstly promoting white genocide. If the EFF is included in a government coalition, then South Africa's economy will collapse. The DA then began running with that narrative, establishing the Moonshot Pact on the basis that the EFF must be kept out of government and the ANC must be dropped out of power. And then ultimately the election results came with MK being the major disruptive factor, which I think disrupted all of us. And it led to where we were initially. And I think that was the most disruptive factor. But from that 10th anniversary, a lot of things happened that showed that there was a concerted effort, in our view, to ensure the EFF doesn't get into power. And I think that 10th anniversary was a shocking moment for all of those who had those intentions. Of course, then, the emergence of MK led to those defections of people like Dali and Floyd, which we have characterized as an electoral opportunism, because they come to a realization that the MK party is an effective alternative vehicle for radical economic change in South Africa post-election results. So they operated like sleeper agents in the EFF until the election results confirmed the fact that the MK party did better than the EFF. And then they started making these phased out exits in the EFF for shock value, I think. So after the election results, and I think there was a video of MK having a rally in Moses Mapita where one, I think they call themselves commanders or something, sort of lashes at Dali because they were supposed to leave. I think on election day, that's the rumor that we've been hearing, that on election day was actually the day where they were supposed to leave the EFF and announce their departure and join the MK party, which I think would have been much more harmful to the EFF because it was going to distract our entire election day and our entire election strategy. So they delayed it, phased out their departures, and it had the impact that it had. But I think the EFF has recovered well from those exits. I would say, I'm not objective, I think.
No, you're not objective. That's a fair point.
I
We're not
would say
objective.
we've
I don't
recovered
know
well.
if I agree with that, but
Yeah.
I take that you're not objective on that point. So I
Yeah.
agree with you. I want to unpack a little bit of that. They've kind of maintained that the talks of the MK have long been there before the elections. So when you describe them as sleeper agents, that feels like a dishonest view, considering that the pair, Dalimpofu says, we were in meetings with Julius Malema. I posted a picture of one of those meetings that had McDonald and Teki in them, so that the conversation was there all along. So the idea that the EFF was caught off guard, that you're betrayed almost, because that's what it was fashioned as, I think is dishonest, isn't it?
I don't think so. So those meetings, when they occurred, the idea was that we must all coalesce into one political party that will lead this progressive front. And the EFF rejected that. And one of the people who were at the forefront of rejecting that notion was Floyd Shivambu. So that's what makes it feel like a sense of betrayal, because he was at the forefront of saying, no, we can't collapse the economic freedom fighters to coalesce around one political party led by Jacob Zuma. So to shift from that immediately after elections, when you are the one who was lobbying against doing something of that nature, feels like a betrayal to us. And the meetings were around, let's talk after elections as to how we're going to structure a progressive sort of caucus or progressive movement or work together. But the EFF outrightly rejected collapsing itself to form part of the MK party. So the perception from the EFF side and characterization of a betrayal or a sleeper agent character, I think is fair, considering that the negotiations prior elections were that we won't collapse the EFF to form part of a political party led by Jacob Zuma, but we can consider working together post-elections, which we did in the form of the Progressive Caucus,
Caucus, yes.
which we did try to do. And then in the midst of all of that, Floyd Shivambu is orchestrating the fact that let's ensure that we support the MK party to be the official opposition. Let's have this document that
By numbers
we
as
tied
well
down.
would have ideally been...
No, ideally,
official
but I'm just saying there were
position.
certain characteristics which I think we should have picked up, that something is amiss, because there were certain things that were sort of tying us to a relationship with the MK party, so that when he crosses to the other side, there's certain agreements that are in place.
in place.
I went to a meeting of the Progressive Caucus, I think a couple of months ago as well, and they were trying to sort of argue, Jimmy Manye, Zonele Manye, was trying to sort of argue that we must sign something that's sort of a statement of intent. And you could see that we're trying to be bound to something, because when we were having the
That thing
interactions...
is not working for the ANC and the
Yeah.
DA. Why would you do that to
So
yourself?
they were trying to make an argument that, no, remember when Shivambu left the EFF, there was a lot of online back and forth between a lot of us. And
Yes, oh my God, you were
And,
part of the problem. Yeah.
there was a lot of that. So there was a Progressive Caucus meeting where I attended, and they said, no, we need to reinstill the confidence of the people in the Progressive Caucus, considering the recent shift and people joining MK. And I was like, no, we don't need to do that. If we're going
That is
to...
actually a fair point. I actually
Yeah.
understand them, and I'll raise it with you.
Yeah.
Because see, in order to be formidable in Parliament as opposition,
Yeah.
you can't do it without them either.
Yeah.
You need them as the opposition in total. I once tweeted about how I think that the opposition has to organize itself. That there's something lackluster there. Yeah, the Twitter people attack me. That's normal. I don't care. But I found it interesting when I saw you tweeting about the quality of
Yeah.
opposition politics in Parliament. And I thought, well, we all then seeing the same picture. And
Yeah.
so when you speak about these differences now, and then at the same time, you simultaneously shun attempts to work together, how do you then do the overall job? Sikle is correct in in characterizing you as the VAT police. And you have been effective. There's a reason why everybody's looking to talk to you. Because you're an important voice. But in order to become a stronger voice, right? And to be more effective going forward, you actually can't necessarily do it without the other party that's there. You must work together, don't you?
I think
don't have to.
voting together is sufficient. I don't think, and I know this will ruffle, I don't think they add anything qualitatively to anything in opposition politics. And when we meet with them, and a lot of the progressive caucus meetings are now really about how we're going to vote and what is the logic of voting in that way. Because initially, in the earlier progressive caucus meetings I would attend, you could see that they don't have a program of action. They don't have a rationale for the opposition work that they do. And then it was almost like they're piggybacking on what the EFF has laid out it's going to do in parliament legislatively. Now we do need support. I can concede. We can't do anything alone there. But I don't think they bring anything qualitatively to opposition politics in parliament. So I think it's sufficient that we work together on the basis of voting together as a voting bloc with regards to rejecting what we might perceive as a regressive legislation being presented in parliament, like the budget and the VAT increase. It's important for us to coalesce around those certain issue by issue positions, and we're strong enough to do that, and we're strong enough and mature enough to overcome our differences when it comes to that in parliament. But other than that, I do not think they bring any value to opposition politics. And I've been saying it consistently, and it's just coming to fruition now. I mean, I wrote about a 7-hour meeting where they sat there in the appropriations committee where we were deliberating about the division of revenue bill. And I'm with our senior researcher, Dr. Gumani, there, and we're contemplating how will this vote go, and will our amendments get support necessary? Then he's like, no, but the MK is here. I get a shock. This is like 5 hours in that they're sitting behind us. They haven't spoken this entire time. So you can see that there's a major challenge. And part of the challenge is, when that was happening, it was when Floyd went to visit Bushiri. You can see that their internal ruptions disrupt their competency. Like, they can't do anything because they're in turmoil internally. So there's no one, I think, there's no one, I think, who sits and thinks about what are we going to say about the budget, what are we going to say about this, because everyone is looking over their shoulder there, and I don't think they can add value in that regard.
I do hear about the internal ructions quite often, but part of what was wonderful about Parliament with the EFF story is that there were people who wanted to help you, who took your hand when you weren't there. But when the EFF was new to Parliament, it was a known thing that there were people who were like, oh, let's help them understand this rule or that rule. There were people, the camaraderie, there was a spirit that was there. So they don't add anything qualitative. I don't know if then you sit down and go, but guys, this is actually what you ought to do so that we can be effective. You passed that.
No, they lost that opportunity. We were willing to do that. I think in one of our meetings, we had even said that one of our researchers must find researchers for their caucus. Like, we were willing to guide them step by step when we had pushed to support them as the official opposition.
Yeah.
And they hadn't conducted what they did with Floyd. There was actual agreement that, look, we're going to help these guys step by step.
Yeah.
We'll capacitate them with research. We'll have regular meetings with them to help them. But they ruined that. So they lost that grace from us a long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the EFF. You spoke about part of the narrative that succeeded in getting the EFF to where it is. The doomsday narrative, in essence, based on what you're describing, was actually a successful campaign by the DA. But you then bring in the shoot the boer argument, which is actually a narrative that's picked up steam now with Donald Trump and US President Donald Trump and the disinformation campaign by fringe groups from here locally. So I don't necessarily put the two together, because by elections, shoot the boer wasn't a part of the conversation, wasn't the narrative. It was definitely the doomsday argument. But you now have this thing with Donald Trump at the moment where, in a way, I don't know if there's a moment where you look at it as a silver lining, because in a way, where it felt like the EFF had lost some level of influence and people have forgotten about the EFF, you gained global attention via comments by those linked to a US president and old videos being posted at that matter.
Yeah, I think it's the stupidity of racism, and I think they don't appreciate that controversy can make heroes. Like, they don't appreciate that their interaction with the EFF, by trying to distort its message, gives us the platform and opportunity to clarify what that message actually is. So we had ventilated the matter of kill the poor, kill the farmer in the Equality Court, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. And we argued there and we won the matter. Now it's the AfriForum has been defeated in the Constitutional Court, if I'm not mistaken. So the matter was put to rest. But because the AfriForum exists to fundraise through fear, they try to stoke this fear mongering around the EFF and around the Kill the Poor, Kill the Farmer song as a process of engaging in white genocide or promoting white genocide. And this gets picked up by Elon Musk, who whispers in Donald Trump's ear. And they give the EFF a platform on something that we've already ventilated and put to bed. So I think it's a combination of two things. They don't understand that they're making the EFF relevant. And secondly, they're utilizing it to stoke fear and possibly to fundraise on the side of AfriForum. So I don't think it's a bad thing in our regard. They are giving us that free publicity and platform to explain what we mean and what we want to say about that. And it's a mistake that racists are making that they don't get. And they're free to do that. But I think the budget process was also a very important process in placing the EFF back into national discourse. And we used that effectively, I think, to get ourselves
I think so.
back.
I can't disagree with budget, but
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
go back to the fear story
Yeah.
because then doomsday by account would have been a
Yeah.
similar thing. Yet it was successful, you say. Yet the EFF, whatever trap was laid for the EFF, you didn't turn into heroes and use that as relevance. The election results suggested that actually there maybe is a credibility question. There is maybe some concern. If you and I agree that the DA's campaign was successful, no?
I think it was. I think it was in terms of framing a narrative around the EFF as being something that is a threat to constitutional democracy, coalescing around a lot of political parties and securing funds to contest elections around keeping the EFF out. I think it was successful for them in that regard. And I don't think it's more of a credibility question. I think perhaps we can do better to communicate the fact that it is not the case. I mean, we're in government in Johannesburg, in Ekurhuleni, the city of Tshwane and Nelson Mandela Bay. There's never been a budget that has not passed there because we were trying to leverage something politically on the side or behind the scenes. There's never been a situation where there's crisis in these municipalities at the level of collapse because the EFF is at the forefront of trying to extort something. So we could do better to communicate the fact that the narrative that an inclusion of the EFF in governance equals constitutional or democratic collapse or is a threat to democracy or could result in a doomsday, because I don't think it's based on any verifiable fact now, but it's a narrative that was built up over a course of time, I think since the inception of the EFF, because of the policies that we represent.
No, it couldn't have been. You worked with the DA in 2016. They wouldn't have worked with you in 2016 in local government.
You know, the DA,
calling you that. You did work with
we
them.
voted for DA
you're in a working relationship.
There's
with
no
the
working relationship.
DA.
And I think it was important that we declined to form part of any coalition.
No, you're in
with
a
the
formal
DA.
coalition. You're working in a working
Yes.
relationship.
I think it was important for us to not do
semantics,
so.
Sinawo, semantics.
They're important.
You're in a working relationship.
They're important because
Absolutely. Even then, Julius would say, "I'm calling Helen. I want to
Yeah,
work."
yeah.
So it
yeah.
was there. That was the truth.
The aim in 2016 was to strip the press from the African National Congress that was extremely emboldened, had a lot of power,
Which you now have.
and relied on the public purse to effectively run its elections machinery. So it was important for us to strip that away from the ANC.
Which you now assist. When you look
Absolutely.
at local government, the ANC keeps you in their back pocket. You are what the ANC relies on to remain at the trough. So it is.
Look, it's a shift of politics, and I don't think to remain at the trough, but now we're included in those local government municipalities as well, and we're able to effectively leverage our work in local government to prove to voters that the EFF is capable to govern.
Minus 20, where else are you showing? Because I think 20 is effective.
Yeah.
I live in Ekurhuleni. The EFF has been co-governing. There's nothing there.
Look,
In my
I
city
wouldn't
that
say
shows
there's
improvement.
nothing. I mean, when we got in
I
there,
live there.
No, I know you live there. And I think you're allowed to democratically have that view as well. But when we got in there, if you remember, we started a massive campaign in terms of cleaning up communities, dumping sites to a point where that the DA even complained that this was not happening. They were being denied trucks when they were in government. So, and when we had an MMC of finance there as well, we recovered a lot of debt owed to the municipality. We ensured that rates were being paid by big corporations that are operating in Ekurhuleni as well. So there are victories to be told. I mean, you
Those
can
are two
tell
things
your
that are
side of
actually
the
false,
story.
by the way.
Which ones?
Those two very things that you're raising
Which
were
ones?
false. The issue of the trucks, the
Yeah.
DA and the EFF had voted that the trucks are obsolete. They were sitting at the depots. We saw the trucks. We went to go look.
The
When
thing
the
I'm-
EFF was suggesting that they might have been stolen,
Yeah.
they weren't stolen. There was a vote by the EFF and the DA that these are obsolete. So they were parked.
I think
They
we're
were
speaking
there.
about two separate things. I'm speaking
Maybe.
about the DA saying that
The
they were
waste
not,
trucks.
they were not being given
Yes.
waste trucks to operate while they were in government. And now that the EFF is in government, waste trucks are all over Ekurhuleni. That's what I'm speaking about.
Guys.
The one about the theft and the non-existence of trucks is a matter that you're speaking about. I'm speaking about the DA complaining that there were no waste trucks for them to clean communities when they were in government.
But let's come back to the relationship.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the relationship. Actually, let me continue. I'll come back to something else.
Yeah.
Let me continue with this phrase for 2 seconds then. The relationship that you have with the ANC is also odd. You know? You specifically will lash out at the ANC and lash out at the ANC making you feel used because of these partnerships with local government. Again, you say 2016, the mission was to get them out. You're working with them now. And once in a while, you get a glimpse of what people feel. Again, Sinawo, I look to you on social media, where you say, I can pull up your tweets. I don't need to know what you said. In essence, that you will not support them all the time. In essence, suggesting that they're using you at local government to stay in power. How does that help us as the electorate? When the very same EFF that worked with the DA in 2016 to get this ANC that they say is poison and that is at the trough out of power, in 2025, you're in bed with them.
Look,
saying you're abused because now you sound like a jilted lover, but you're still there.
I think in 2016, we did that to weaken the ANC, and it is weakened now to a point where it can't recover, I would argue. To work with them now is convenient for the EFF because it gives us an opportunity to be in posts of government and conduct service delivery, in our opinion. So it works for us now to be in a MMC post in Johannesburg, in Ekurhuleni, in Tshwane, in Nelson Mandela Bay, because it gives us an opportunity to exhibit that we can govern. That is how it is convenient for us. But the ANC is engaged in a relationship with the EFF that presumes that we should support them all the time. And when we don't, they use that as some sort of exhibition that they shouldn't work with us in national government. And I don't say it as a jilted lover. I say it because it's manipulative on their side, but also inconsistent because they know that when they are in trouble, for example, the mayor of Ekurhuleni,
they keep in the back pocket.
They keep us in the back pocket.
You helped retain Dr. Tagaza, yes,
2 weeks ago or last week ago.
Yep.
When they're in trouble with a vote of no confidence, they know that let's go and talk to the EFF because we need their support. When they're in trouble in terms of the budget, they come to us to ask us to abstain.
I posted the picture there by the toilet. So you're confirming that you're a useful tool to
I don't
the
think
ANC.
They perceive us as that, and I think that's the warning that the President and Commander-in-Chief was making to them, that you can't consider us fire on one day and water on the next day, because there's going to be consequences for that as well. So as much as they might think we're a useful tool, we can regard them as a useful tool for us as well, because we've got MMCs at their behest in terms of these metropolitans. So I'm not really concerned about how they perceive us, but they must know that we're not beholden to them. And their characterization of the EFF, which is negative, we must get the EFF out in Ekurhuleni. They're not helpful, but when they're in trouble, they come to the EFF. They must know that that is not always going to be consistently the case, that we're going to be watered the next day when we've been fired for the whole time and they don't want to work with us in other spheres of government. I think the tweet you're talking about is the one of Mbalula. I think Fikile Mbalula is at the center of not wanting to have the EFF in national government. That's my personal opinion. And he's got some nefarious tie to the Democratic Alliance that he's holding on to. I don't know if he thinks it's going to help him in his presidential campaign in 2027. I don't know. But he did state also the other day that including the EFF national government will lead to their demise because we might be worse than the DA. Perhaps that's the same line of argument they had in Ekurhuleni, that we're outperforming them, and to include us will eat at the same base that we share. But to be useful tools for each other is neither here nor there. But they must know that we're not going to always be there to support them when they need help, when they regard us as useful tools, as you've said.
Now that you've mentioned the ANC succession debate.
Yeah.
Because I didn't bring it into the conversation. You did.
Yeah.
I want that clarity, ne? When you speak about Fikile Mbalula, I saw a statement from the EFF about Deputy President Paul Mashatile's attempted assassination. I thought, on the one hand, it is important to worry about a leader and a leader's well-being and claims of an assassination. Absolutely. Yeah. But it also got me thinking that there seems to be this constant focus on dethroning the ANC. You just said that you've weakened it already. So one would then say, but you've done the job. Should you not be focusing on the EFF and throning yourselves? You guys used to call yourselves the government in waiting. Should that not be the focus as opposed to dethroning the ANC? So what if Mbax wants to hold on to the DA because he wants to be president of the ANC through the DA? That's their business. It's got nothing to do with your focus. Should be the Reds, surely.
No, it is, and it is. But I think it's just political commentary. It's something that we're observing. Yeah, it's something that I think needs to be said, because he's he's operating with that logic. I mean, when we sent that message, that statement about the threats of assassination to the deputy president, it was out of genuine concern as to, of course, there are those
interesting
underlying
timing.
there are
It was
those
very interesting
underlying
timing, EFF, but okay, it was genuine
politics
concern.
that look,
It was
the ANC is
authentic.
not. It was authentic that it's a deputy president of South Africa, whether we like him or not. But it's someone that is saying this car was shot at 6 times. Why is no one saying anything? We even said in the statement, look, we know that there's those internal challenges in the ANC. Maybe they don't want to say anything, but state departments, state agencies, and law enforcement should say something when there's a supposed threat to the life of the deputy president. The fact that it would entrench perhaps contradictions in the ANC, I think, is not our intention. But of course, it did have that impact as well.
But you carry that perception with you then, that the EFF, as long as it exists, it's almost like, if you look at them currently, if you look at Action SA and DA,
Yeah.
DA people will tell you that Action SA, they feel, is obsessed with them
Yeah.
and will make every decision to one-up them, to deal with them.
Yeah.
You then need to also maybe shake that off, because you're not a new party. You're now 12 years this year. And I don't think you can afford to continuously be seen as being obsessed with the ANC. Yet, political commentary, as you call it, puts you exactly there.
No, I don't think. I think the relationship between us and the ANC and Action SA and DA is completely different. I don't think we are there's something deeply rooted wrong between Action SA and DA. And I think all former DA leaders, Bossa as well. The budget process showed me that. Yeah, the budget process showed me that they're really interested in hurting the DA in whatever shape or form. And it informs their decisions and interpretations of legislation. I don't think it's gone that far or has been that far with the EFF. Where necessary, we work with the ANC if it's to the benefit of people or if it's to the benefit of the EFF, having a mechanism to have access to power to ensure the service delivery objectives. But the Action SA and DA is extremely deep-rooted and is going to cause a lot more harm than good, I think, to Herman Mashaba and Mose Maimane. I'm told Songezo Zibi also tried to be a counselor or something of the DA and was rejected. I don't know how true that is. But their interactions with the DA, I don't think are productive for them or for the country. I think they've got a lot to offer. And
Action SA,
all of them, I think they've got a lot to offer.
All our political parties have their pros and cons across the board, yeah.
But they are blinded by their rage towards the DA, whatever it causes it. The budget process should have shown us. They were refusing to listen to anyone's logic about this is not going to be possible by this time and date and frame. And you could see them just pivot to the fact that they're trying to stop the DA from extorting the ANC. So their interaction is not productive. And I mean, they meant well on the budget. I think they meant well when they were doing those votes for recommendations of 30 days. But the blinders they had to try to undercut the DA in the GNU made them have deep misinterpretations of what could happen.
In 2010, not 2010, when the EFF
I was in high
10
school.
years.
You can't.
Okay, I'm trying to think about where was I. I'm not too old. It's okay. When the EFF marked 10 years.
Yeah.
One of the big things was that 1 million members campaign. The election results suggested that you don't have 1 million members. That's the election results. And then when you look at by-election results as well, it suggests that some of the branches that are being launched, we should actually question the veracity of what is being presented as part of that rebuilding process.
The EFF has received 1.2 million votes in the 2024 elections. I don't know if I've got that figure correct.
Yeah, you did broach, I remember.
So
you did broach 1 million. Okay.
Yeah, the correlation between million members and the voter outcome, I don't think is too far apart, if you're going to look at it in that sense. But I hear where you're coming from. There is a need to interrogate, and we've had that conversation internally at the National People's Assembly, and even at the recent meeting we had, about our membership system and its strength to verify the credibility of the data that we received. This is a concession that the EFF makes in its discussion documents to the Third National People's Assembly as well, that we need to constantly work on not only modernizing and digitizing our membership systems, but ensuring that they can credibly verify attempts to subvert the authenticity of membership through launching of fake or bogus branches, because the intent to do that is always towards conferences. So, for example, now we're going to have sub-regional people's assemblies because we dissolved regions.
Yes.
So people who have an interest in leadership or are pursuing those positions because they think it will equate to them either being councillors next year or something of that nature will try to manipulate the process of establishing genuine branches of the EFF. But we are working on that. I mean, the Secretary General of the EFF now is conducting much more aggressive verification of membership, what we receive from the ground, what we receive from the provinces and structures, and turning back a lot of submissions that we are receiving of structures that we think are not authentic or do not meet the criteria to be genuine branches of the EFF as well. So it's something that we're working on. And I think it's commendable that the EFF is investing in something of that nature to have a credible, verifiable membership database system. And it is going to translate into better performances in by-elections. Historically, the EFF is not an organization that performs better in by-elections or local government elections as compared to national elections. And that is something we need to improve on when it comes to the candidates that we put forward. A candidate for a by-election has to be someone who's rooted in that community, who's known, who's an activist, who's respected. So we've established criteria for our councillor candidates as well as to what type of person can stand. And I can tell you now, for example, recently I'm deployed in Johannesburg in Ward 59. The candidate that we had proposed to the headquarters was rejected twice until we got to a candidate that met the criteria that the EFF wants of a councillor candidate of the EFF. So there's a lot of systems that we're putting in place. We're older, but we're still relatively young. So there's still things that we need to get right. I mean, 11 years, we're not even a teenager. 12 years, we're not teenagers yet. So I think the EFF is not doing too badly. I mean, the emergence of MK will make it look like that, but we perceive that as in line with, I mean, the KZN was run by IFP at one point. Look at where they are now.
Yeah.
So it's part and parcel of those things that happen politically, that there'll be an emergence of something new and it will attract people. It's got its voter base primarily in KZN. But we think those things, we're going to have to withstand them as the EFF over time.
Help me understand this with that in mind. The discrepancy between a branch that launches in KZN with 200 members strong, good standing, that delivers 20 votes. Those kind of discrepancies, what is that?
That's a reflection of something that was produced inauthentically. So it's a branch that you can see was either manipulated ahead of the Third National People's Assembly last year, because people wanted delegates who would either support their candidates in that assembly, or a branch that has collapsed due to not being serviced. I mean, there's a culture of just establishing structures and then leaving them like that, not conducting political education, not prescribing to them what is required of a branch in terms of continued existence, frequency of meetings, servicing communities, identifying challenges. So there's still a lot of work we need to do in terms of politicizing our branches so that they can continue to exist. You can't launch a branch today or establish a structure with 200 members today and then have one meeting and then never go back to meet those people ever again and expect that to translate to votes for the EFF. So there's a culture we are going to try to build and inculcate that branches require servicing. I can't knock on someone's door 6 months ago and expect them to vote for me 6 months later when I've never interacted with them after I signed them as a member of the EFF.
That speaks to me as a work ethics issue, and that's one that your leader has raised. I've heard Julius Malema over the past years raising concerns about members who aren't willing to actually hit the ground doing the work. That feels like a problem that persists. You can argue you guys are a pre-teen party as you're making it, but the fact that that message doesn't seem to resonate, and the result is you're seeing it in election results. Political parties pursue elections to stay in power. That's what's at risk here. That's what's threatened by this culture.
Absolutely. It is a work ethic challenge. I think we should concede to that. And in his recent address to the Central Command team as well, I think the president raised his displeasure about KwaZulu-Natal in particular, not sort of expressing its remorse for the failures of last year through an increased work ethic. And it's something that we need to work on. I mean, we need to come to an appreciation of where we are as a political party. We declined, marginally, I would argue, but there's a lot of narratives around it. I saw Kanita, I think, write an article on News 24, said we were decimated in the 2024 polls. So I wouldn't define it as decimation, but it is a decline that must be noted.
It's a decline. It's a massive
and
decline,
accepted.
but I wouldn't define it as decimated. You're decimated in KZN in 2024, but not the overall
everyone
picture.
else. Yeah.
like everyone else.
I mean, the ANC went from 52 to 17. That's decimation.
You guys love whataboutism. Anyway, I want to wrap up though, but I want to go back to the Trump issue that we spoke about. What's been interesting to me seeing Carl Niehaus speaking. I understand why, under the current climate, it would be important for Carl Niehaus, who's not a Central Command team member, to speak, because you need to project that you are not what they claim that you are, right? But Carl Niehaus has actually been given a platform in the EFF for some time. There was a period where he was there, Mzwanele Manye was there, Busum Kobane was there. These were people who seemed to be close to former President Jacob Zuma. Some of the murmurs I'd get from fighters themselves is, What is this though? That Carl Niehaus has gone to a court case in Limpopo, and I feel bad for picking at Carl, but it's not about Carl. It's actually about the organization, where he'll go to a court case in Limpopo, and the regional leader there doesn't speak, never speaks. But Carl Niehaus is given a microphone and does interviews. And EFF members are watching that. And then they watch also how these people were ushered in and were taken straight to parliament. The EFF can make an argument that deployment is not a reward, but it does communicate a particular message to your members, whether you like it or not. That disgruntlement does become an issue. It does fester.
Yeah, I don't know about the case where Carl spoke ahead of a regional leader somewhere.
It was a court case in Mudimole. Even I remember seeing it last year.
Okay. No, look, I think those are frustrations that have been aired in the EFF about people being, the term used is parachuted ahead of what is hard-working ground forces. But of course, you're correct. We don't characterize deployment as a reward for either long-standing membership or anything. We look at the qualities that someone brings to the table. And one of the qualities that Carl brings is not only that he's white and will break down a narrative that the EFF is a racist organization. He's an articulate individual. He's got experience in government. He was the spokesperson of Nelson Mandela. He's someone who's been around the political scene, who brings a level of experience as well. So there are a lot of attributes that he brings to the table, and there are aspects of him that he might not be strong at that another fighter next to him is as well. So I think the EFF is maximizing on people's capabilities and strengths as far as it can do, and that is all that is happening with Carl Niehaus. We're not expecting him to change the entire perception of the EFF to be correctly appreciated as an organization that is not racist, but is a living example that we're not going to kill any white person when we get into power. There's one amongst us. In fact, there's many. There's a branch in Tshwane where the deputy chair of Gauteng likes to go a lot. I mean, it's dominated by white members. So it's a perception we do need to reverse, and he's an integral part of that as well. But that's not the only value he has. He was very important during the defense crisis of the deployment of soldiers to the DRC.
Yes, in Parliament.
In Parliament, he was instrumental in that role. He's got
I saw Carl. I did notice Carl's work there.
So those are the types of things we're looking for in terms of value from him. And I think our fighters have begun to appreciate him as well, especially after those exits, that he's remained consistent. He's expressed that he's not going anywhere, which is something that was necessary and needed, like verbal expression that we're going to remain here, we're not going anywhere. And he's pledged his allegiance to the EFF, which is something that I think fighters have begun to appreciate over time. I know he was receiving a lot of abuse when Busisiwe and Zwanele were leaving, that when is he leaving? We're expecting him to leave as well. He's gone, he's endured through that. And I think he's earned the respect of a lot of members of the EFF.
Is that chapter closed? Does the EFF feel that everybody else who's there with it at the moment is going to stay put, and that you called it a betrayal, that the betrayal era no, let me take myself seriously for 2 seconds, but that the so-called betrayal era is finished? Is the EFF secure that those who are in the room at the moment want to be there and want to help build the berets?
Yeah, I think the EFF is extremely stable and secure now. And a lot of the perceptions that we were reliant on certain individuals, I think, has been broken away over the past couple of months as well. Because there was something that was going around that the EFF is going through a brain drain. We're losing critical experience in parliament that is going to perhaps harm our effectiveness as an opposition. And that is not only, those reflections don't only harm confidence externally, but even internally. I mean, I was in the student command for many years. I looked up to people like Fresh Bambu and Buisin. So you must understand that those departures are not only harmful for external perception, but even internal morale. But I think now we've been able to be resilient enough and show to the membership that the EFF has got that diverse voices in and outside of parliament who are able to make qualitative contributions. So I think we're stable for now. I think we've passed that phase. Of course, people can leave and come to the EFF as they please, but I don't think now it will be within the context of an infiltration or a betrayal. It will be the people genuinely practicing their democratic rights to do so, which I don't think Dali and Floyd were doing.
I don't know if I'm supposed to have a view or to keep it to myself, but I watched the EFF during the SONA debates.
Yeah.
In the past, the EFF was quite dynamic. because the duo, whether you like it or not, Hussein and Floyd were quite dynamic in Parliament, and that spark was missing. And it's almost a weird thing where you and Sihle feel like almost the next layer of what that spark feels like. You and I, and it's a you and I thing because I laughed at you. Is it last year before the elections where I think you'd been removed from Parliament, and then it was actually Floyd's departure that paved the way for you to go back to Parliament. Do you remember what you said to me when you saw me about the doghouse?
I
And
remember.
that's
I
about
remember.
your own growth.
I
This
remember.
speaks to your own growth.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
before then, Julius Malema had been in Limpopo and he spoke about those who were not campaigning, were not doing the work, pulling up their socks. Those who were partying during campaigning. And many people said to me, look no further than Sinawo Tambo for the problematic character. Your own lessons in your own growth between, I suppose, last year and everything that's happened and now.
Yeah, I was in the doghouse. I was
Sinawo.
removed. I was removed during elections for it's ill discipline. So I was removed as a spokesperson and from the parliament list. Yeah, I had to resign from the parliament list. And I think it's been an important lesson in discipline and patience with the organization and its processes, which I think should have been, I would have hoped would have been appreciated by other people who have left the EFF now, who have also been custodians of discipline, that the discipline of the organization demands patience with it. And also the discipline of the organization can mold you to become a better activist, better individual, and a better leader, which I hope I am now. And I've learned from the lessons of the previous year as well. And look, they did play their role in the terms of the dynamicism of the EFF in Parliament. I disagree with you about the Sona debates. I think it was President Naledi and Sihlo debated those.
Well, I think
they were
Naledi is incredible.
impactful.
I'll never take it away from Naledi.
Yeah.
Oh no, Naledi Chirwa, I think, isn't actually highlighted as she ought to by the EFF, but that's a different conversation for a different day. I think she is actually an interesting figure in the political space.
Yeah.
But I stand by what I said.
Yeah. So I think it's going to take time for members of parliament to grow into a different type of dynamicism than what Floyd and Mboiseni brought to the table. It's going to be different. It's not going to be the same. I mean, I'm not as charismatic or funny. I can't sing, but there's something I bring to the table. Sihle as well brings his own thing.
Singing, yeah.
Everyone is going to bring their own thing to the table. And
Yeah.
I think it's that we're in that moment now where members of parliament of the EFF are stepping up to the plate. And we're going to have to create a new perception of the EFF and how it makes its contributions. I mean, we'd said we're not going to be as disruptive. We're going to make qualitative contributions. So it's part of that phase of shifting away from pay back the money, standing on top of the tables, being kicked out by bouncers, and shifting into a new era of perhaps more mature politics. And that was not going to be as exciting in terms of visually.
But definitely is more if you think about the approach.
Yeah.
Lisa Katando in the Sunday Times, I love Liz, so I will quote Liz.
Yeah.
But Liz writes, she likens you to Mboiseni Ndlozi in a piece she wrote about the vet impasse and how you've managed it. And I laughed a little bit because one can argue that Mboiseni was like an Icarus. He flew too close to the sun. Part of the question around Mboiseni at some point was, does he feel his star is too bright? Is he a threat to even those in leadership in the EFF and he's been dealt with? And that's been part of his own lessons about becoming bigger than some in the organization or the organization itself. That kind of concern you don't have?
No, I don't. I saw that. She said it to me before she wrote it. And I don't know why she wrote it. But
if it's a perception that people have about you, then it's a perception. I don't even think it's about the writer. It's a perception.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm asking, you don't feel like Icarus?
No. I don't
You're not going to
think,
fly too close to the sun?
I don't think there's a sun to fly too close to. I think the EFF gives us all opportunities to exhibit whatever talents that we may have, to make contributions in whatever way that we may make them. And I can appreciate comparisons with previous leaders of the EFF, but I'm not trying to become anyone. I'm charting my own path in the EFF, and hopefully will make a meaningful contribution, and perhaps as meaningful as what was made in the past as well. But I don't have any anxiety of outshining anyone or flying too close to the sun or thinking that I am more important than anyone next to me either. I'm just making my contribution. I mean, the EFF has shown over the years that we're able to reinvent ourselves regardless of any individual and whatever star power they might be perceived to have. I was removed as a spokesperson, the EFF continued. Wiseni was removed as a spokesperson, the EFF continued. We're able to reinvent ourselves and produce new and dynamic leaders all the time. So I'm not concerned about anything like that.
My parting shot. Part of your story is the rise through fees must fall, that period. And it marks 10 years this year. Your thoughts about that? Because when you look around, the issues that students brought this country to a standstill for are very much with us still.
Yeah, nothing has changed. It's quite sad. I saw the shooting of a student in Walter Sisulu University as well, at the behest of an employee or private security or something like that. It's the same challenges we faced in 2015 when I was at UCT as well. Not much has changed at all. And I think it's quite sad that even when we got into institutions of higher learning 10 years ago, there were generations before us who had been fighting the same fights, who had suffered losses in terms of lives, who had been harmed, academically, financially excluded for fighting for free education. And it seems like it's just a generational thing that we're passing down and is not being reversed or changed. So I think we need to do much more structurally at the level of government to make sure that the next generation doesn't have to keep on going to sacrifice their bodies, present themselves to bullets and exclusions in order to get free education. And it's a responsibility of all of us, especially those of us who are part of that generation and are now, of course, in Parliament. Sihle has introduced a debt student cancellation bill to clear the debt of students who have graduated in the past but can't access their qualifications. I think those are measures we must start pursuing as a generation who knows the pain of those struggles. But it's quite unfortunate that nothing seems to have changed. And one thing that we need to perhaps emphasize is that there needs to be a regulation of how tertiary institutions contract private security companies and private security. There's a militarization of our campuses, which I think is unnecessary. And if I look at the generation of now, they are not as militant as we used to be. I've not seen any reports of someone burning a library or stoning anything. We were
Slightly more tempered, yeah.
Yeah, they're much more tempered. So you don't understand why there's introduction of so much militancy when it's not required, when students are not posing what was deemed as a threat to infrastructure, which we were said to be posing at that time. So we need to demilitarize campuses, but we need to do much more structurally to stop generations and generations from being traumatized by this.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to leave it at that. That's Sinawo Tambo. I never introduced, if I said Sinawo Tambo is the spokesperson and a member of parliament of the EFF at the beginning, but that's who he is. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Tshidi.
This is Politricking
On record, Tshidi.
with Tshidi Madia on EWN.